In this video, we will look at how to handle permissions or requesting permissions at runtime. So you'll see on Android 6 and higher, they've introduced approving each permission on runtime. So basically, if you go to the developer's website, developer.android.com, training permissions requesting, you will find this website where it says every Android app runs in a limited access sandbox. If an app needs to use resources or information outside of its own sandbox, the app has to request the appropriate permission. So for example, if I want to use the camera, which is not part of my application, so I want to use the system camera, then I would need to go outside of the sandbox for the app, and I need to request the appropriate permission. You declare that your app needs a permission by listing a permission in the app manifest, so we'll look at that, and then requesting that the user approve each of those permissions at runtime. So if you have a phone that's running, you can see here, less than Android 5.1.1, API level 22 or lower, then you will see that while you're installing this app, this little dialog will pop up and you are able to accept all these permissions that we need to have in order for this application to work. But with Android introducing Android 6, they've introduced a system where we request permissions at runtime wherever you're using that specific feature that requires the permission. So it's a bit different. There we just said accept for everything, and here on every single feature, this little dialog will pop up and the user can allow or deny that specific permission. So how do I get to this page? If you just go down a bit, you'll see there's protection levels. So on the first page, if you just click on protection levels, it will take you to this page. So let's just quickly have a look at these protection levels, because the system's behavior after you declare permission depends on how sensitive the permission is. Some permissions are considered normal permissions, so the system immediately grants them upon installation, and other permissions are considered dangerous, so that the user must explicitly grant your app access. And for information about this, this is the link. So if we go there, just go down a bit after these pictures, you will see they give us a list of all the normal, this is the list of all the normal permissions. So you can see they're accessing the location, network state, and the Wi-Fi state, checking if there's internet access, internet itself, NFC, stuff like that, setting the alarm and wallpapers, and waking the phone up. That's all normal permissions, and they will be automatically granted. You don't need to grant them. And same with the protection signature. There's a few there. And then we get to the dangerous permissions. And the dangerous permissions cover areas where the app wants data or resources that involve the user's private information, or could potentially affect the user's stored data or the operation of other apps. For example, the ability to read the user's contacts is a dangerous permission. If an app declares that it needs a dangerous permission, the user has to explicitly grant the permission to the app. And until the user approves that permission, your app cannot provide functionality that depends on that permission. So if you click on table 1 below, these are all the dangerous permissions, and we're going to look at how to handle those dangerous permissions. And now I've lost it. Where is it now? There we go. Right, so there's the dangerous permissions. Calendar, to read the calendar, write the calendar, read the call log, write the call log, using the camera, contacts, location, the find location and the course location. There's microphone, there's phone, there's sensors, for example, the body sensor, there's SMSs, and there's storage. So all of these are considered dangerous permissions, and we need to handle this at runtime. All the other permissions will be automatically approved, and the user doesn't need to approve or allow these permissions. So these are the only ones that we need to handle in coding. So we're going to look at this today in this video on how to handle permissions that we need to do at runtime for these dangerous permissions. Okay, so the one that we're going to work with today is just to look at an example of, let's say, write external storage. We're not going to actually write to external storage, but we're going to take one of these to just see how it works and how you will handle it. When trying to write to an external storage and you did not handle the permission, then it will give you an exception, and that exception message will tell you to handle this exception at runtime. So then you can come back and just implement what we're going to do in this video. Right, so let's go to Android Studio. I've created a new project called Android 6 Permissions Video and done absolutely nothing afterwards. So I'm going to go into the main XML Just open up this one a bit. Go to text, and let's change this constraint layout just to a linear layout. And then let's set the orientation there to be vertical. And I'm going to remove the text view, and the only thing I'm going to have on this layout will be a simple button. So just drag in your button there. Again, let me just open up a bit. Can't zoom in. Okay, so there's your button. I'm going to go to the layout margin and set an all margin to 30. And then let's make the text on the button say do something. And also the ID for this button, let's make it btn do. Right, so that's all we're going to have on our layout. You can just drag in one button there. Go to your main activity and let's just set up that button quickly. So we're going to say btn or button, btn, let's call it do. Alt enter for your import if you missed it. And then let's set it up. btn do equals find the view by its ID, r.id.btn do. Then let's set up the on-click listener. So it's going to be btn-do.set on-click listener, new on-click listener, and now we've got our button sorted out. Right, so we're going to have this button simulate or simulating something that happens that must have a permission, or the user must give permission at runtime to do. So in this case, we're going to simulate writing to external storage. So what we want to do then right from the start, as soon as the user tries to access that specific feature that requires the permission, we're going to start off with an if statement. And we're going to refer to the context compat class. And on that class, we're going to call the check self permission method. And you can see that this method accepts a context and a string permission that you want to check for. So in this case, the context can just be the main activity.this. Your string permission will be then manifest.permission dot one of the permissions that you want to check for. So the one I'm going to check for here is the write external storage, although we're not actually writing to external storage. And then I'm going to test it against something, because this is basically just giving me some integer value back. That for checking the self permission, and now we need to check this against some integer value. So we're going to go to the package manager dot, and you'll see that there's permission denied and permission granted. So I'm going to go to the granted option, and if you look at this if statement again, we're basically checking a permission called write external storage if it's not equal to granted. So if it's not been granted writing to external storage, then we will force it to happen, or we will force the user to approve this specific permission or allow this specific permission. So how do we do that? So in order to get that system pop-up or dialog, we're going to say activity compat. So again, we're going to, well, this one was context compat, this one is activity compat, and then we're going to call request permissions. And the permission that you want to request here, or if you're doing the request here, you need to pass in an activity, a string array of permissions that you want to request for, and a request code, a unique request code. So let's start off with the context, which will be the main activity.this again. Your second argument will be a new string array. And now with the curly brackets there, we can now go and add all the different permissions that we want to request the user to allow. So we're going to say for this one, it's just again manifest.permission.write external storage. So if I had more than one permission I wanted to test for, I can just separate them by commas there and say manifest.permission.whatever the other one is we want to also allow. Then your last argument there, I'm just going to go to a new line there, will be a unique request code. So for your request code, let's just go to the top, and I'm going to declare a request code there at the top. So I'm going to say private static final int, and let's call this one write external storage request code, something like that, and let's set it to 1. So now instead of, let's just type this out, request underscore code. Okay, so there's public static final int, the write external storage request code is a 1, and that is the one I want to have there. So I'm going to say write external storage request code. Right, so we're going to come back to this request code, this unique code, when we're done with this part. So let's just see if this part works. So the else part then will be the permission has been granted already, and we can take the user into the feature or into the app that uses the feature. So I will just display a toast here saying permission granted. Thank you. Right, so let's just go over this coding again. So in this if statement, we're testing if the permission of writing to external storage has been granted. If it has not been granted, we pop up that dialog to ask the user to allow it. And then if this has already been granted a previous time, we just take him. So in this else, you can take the user to the feature, whether it's using the camera or whatever dangerous permission you're using here. So in our case, we will just say permission granted. Thank you. Let's run this quickly and just see what we get so far. Just make sure that you're running on a device with Android 6 or above. Right, so if you run this application now and you click on do something, you will see it actually does absolutely nothing. And the reason for this is because we need to go into the manifest file and also add that permission there. So look at where my cursor is at. It's underneath your manifest opening tag, but above your application tag. Then we're going to type there users permission, and the permission that we want to get there is write external storage. So it gives you a list of all the different permissions that you can use, and you can just start typing write, and you'll get write external storage. Just one / and it ends off. So this is using the permission called write external storage. And now when we run it, it will have that permission activated and it will test for it. Right, so if I click on do something now, you will see it pops up this dialog box saying Android 6 permissions, the app, allow the app to access the photos, the media and files on your device. So when you're using write external storage, this is what you will be able to do. You will be able to access photos, media and files on the device. And will the user allow or deny this? So if the user clicks on deny, you will see if we go back to do something, it will pop up this dialog again. But now it will activate don't ask again. And if I click on allow and I go back and click on do something, you can see it goes to permission granted. Thank you very much. So now another way that the user can actually go and change this permission is to go into the settings part of the phone. So if you go into settings and you go to apps, let me just go back there. So go to settings of your app, sorry, not your app, your phone. Go to settings of your phone, go to apps, and then search for your specific app. Mine is called Android 6 Permissions Video. And you'll see there's a permissions section there. And if you go into it, you can see that the permission for storage has been granted. So I can switch this off or on here. So the user can also do the same. So if I switch it off and I go back to the app and click on do something again, then again it will pop up this dialog because now the user must allow it first again before it can use the feature of the app. So the next part of this video is then to see how do we handle the allow and the deny button. Because allow, we've seen that that works. If I click on allow, it will say permission granted, thank you, when I try to click on the button again. But if the user says deny and come back again here to use it, there's a don't ask again. So deny has got two options. It's got just denying it or don't ask again and deny. So now if I click on the button, absolutely nothing will happen. It will not bother the user again, but the user won't be able to get into the app. So now the user's only other option is to go into the settings part of the phone, into the app settings, and then switch it on. Okay, so if I go back now, because I changed it, it will again pop up that dialog. So let's see how to handle this deny and the allow and what we can do then in coding. What the Android guys basically say is when the user clicks on deny, we should not just let it be empty and not show them anything. Because if he clicks there again, it will again get this and say deny again. So if the user clicks on the button and he clicks on deny, we want to have our own pop-up on the screen, our own dialog on the screen, explaining a bit more about why the user should have this permission allowed. So this is the part where you can really give a detailed explanation on we need to use the camera because when we can't access the camera, we can't use a barcode to scan or whatever you wanted to do. So you give some more information to the user, and then after that we'll pop up this again to again allow him to allow this permission or deny it. So after he's read your explanation on why he needs this specific permission, he can allow or deny. So let's see how we do that. So you can see that we've used a specific unique request code, and we set that request code to 1. So the previous time we used request codes is for the onActivity result method. So this is something similar where we're going to have an onRequest permissions result. So just right click there. So just see where my cursor is at. It's outside of the onCreate but still in the class. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say generate, go to override methods, and let's type in onRequest. And if you start typing permissions, you'll see this method, onRequest permissions result. Double click that method and you can remove that call to super. Right, let's look at this method quickly. So far for this method, we've got a request code that's passed in. So this line of coding will basically pop up that dialog. The interaction of the user with that dialog will always come back to onRequest permissions result. And it will come back with this specific request code. So I could have different if statements checking different stuff, and it will go to a different request code if you wanted to. So the request code here is equal to 1, and that's the request code that will be passed in when it comes back here. Then the second argument will be a string of all the permissions that were asked for, and then there's a grant results array of type integer that will tell me whether a specific permission has been granted or not. So because we are only working with one permission going through, that permission will be in grant results at position 0. Okay, so let's quickly have a look at this. So the first step I want to do here is to first check if the request code is in fact this right external storage request code. So then I know we came back from this specific dialog. And now inside of this, we can go and check this grant results. So grant results at position number 0, if it's equal to, let's just go to package manager again, and you'll see there's permission granted. So if permission granted has been selected, so you can make a comment there, this is clicking, let's just say clicking the allow button. So this if statement will enter only if the user clicked this allow button, then it will go to this if statement, or it will go into it. So for now, we're just going to display a toast there, and we basically want to say the same thing as what we did here. But let's just make it a bit different. Instead of saying permission granted thank you, let's start with thank you permission granted. But at the end, ultimately, this is exactly the same thing you're going to do there and there. Okay, so take the user to the feature. Here's the same thing. Take the user to the feature. Right, so this is the if statement for when the user clicks on the allow button. So we're checking if the permission was granted. Now we're going to have an else if there. And this one is checking for the grant results at position 0 also, if it is package manager dot permission denied. So now if the user clicked on the deny button, so I'm just going to click or just add a comment here also, clicking the deny button. So let's just make that one also capitals. That's the allow button. This is the deny button. Now remember, there's two options for clicking on deny. So whether the user selects don't ask again and click on deny, or do not select it and click on deny, both of them will go into this else if. So we're checking if the button of deny is clicked. And now inside of this else if, we need to go and check whether this checkbox was clicked or not. Okay, when clicking on deny. Right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to test in here if activity compat dot should show request permissions rational. Your first argument there is your main activity again, or just your context. So it's the main activity.this. And your second argument is the specific permission. So we're going to go to manifest.permission.write external storage. Let me just take this to a new line again. So what this if statement now is checking is whether we should show this message to the user again. So remember, if the user says, let's say deny there, and he clicks do something again, then you will agree that the permission granted is not there. So if I click on deny, then it will not go into permission granted, but it will go into permission denied. And if it was clicked as only the deny button and not selecting this checkbox there, then it will go into this if statement. So we can add a comment here, only clicking deny. Then it will go into this if statement. And what we want to do then, if the user only clicks on deny and not select that checkbox, we want to now give a bit more explanation on why he needs to allow this specific permission. So we're going to use an alert dialog. So we're going to say alert dialog dot builder. Let's call it dialog equals new alert dialog dot builder. And you need to pass in the context, so we can just pass in this or the main activity.this. Now on this dialog, we're going to set, let's start with the title. I'm going to set the title as whatever you want the title to be. I'm going to say important permission required. Then after this title, we can also set a message. So I'm going to say set the message, and the message here will now be your detailed explanation on why the user should actually use this specific or allow this specific permission. So we'll say something like this permission is required or is important to save a file to the phone. Please permit this permission in order, just go to a new line, to use the feature. Something like that. So you can have it as big as you want there. And then afterwards, so we're going to set the title, we're going to set the message, and then we can use a button to get some feedback from the user. So there's 3 buttons you can use with this dialog, and that is the set positive button, there's a set negative button, and there's a set neutral button. So I'm going to use the set positive button here. The first argument will be what is the text that will be displayed on the button. So I'm going to say OK, and then take him to somewhere else. And then the second argument is an on-click listener. So you just start typing new on, and you can see this dialog interface.onClick listener appears, and you just select it. Make sure that you add your semicolon at the end. So this is then what happens if the user will click on the OK button. And then the second part, dialog.set the negative button. Also, what will be the text on the negative button? We'll say no thanks. And then also go and say new on, which will give you a dialog interface. Just select it and then close it off with a semicolon. And then right at the end, we will say dialog.show, and that will actually start showing the dialog. So remember this if statement, if we enter this if statement, the user only clicked on deny, and now we're giving him more information. And then we're saying important permission required. This permission is important to save the file to the phone. If he says OK, then we want to pop up that same dialog again to allow him to permit that specific permission. Right, so I'm just going to go and I'm going to copy these 2 lines. So it's exactly the same in your btn do in that if statement, this one that pops up that dialog. So we're going to use this and do it inside of this method. So if he says OK, we're going to give those options to him again to again allow or deny. And then if he says no thanks, you can decide on what you want to do there. I'm just going to display a toast now and say something like cannot use this feature unless you allow it. Something like that. So the user knows he cannot use that feature if he do not allow it. And that's basically the only thing we're going to do there. Right, so remember this else if is the user clicked on the deny button. Two options to click on the deny button, only clicking deny or the else now. So it's better to just go click next to this if statements bracket to see where it ends. And then after that, that's the else. So now there's two options when he gets in here, just clicking deny. And this one, the second one, is saying never ask again with the deny button. So that's the last option here. If he clicks on don't ask again and deny, this will be this else then. Okay, so I'm just going to display a toast here, and the toast will say something like, we will never show this to you again. Right, and that's basically it for your permissions. So if we will just go through the coding again before we end this video, but let's just run it quickly and see how it works now. Right, so let's click on do something now. And maybe before you click on do something, just go to settings again and change this back. Just click on it so it changes, and then keep it at off, and then go back to your app so it resets. If I click on do something, you will see that this pops up. Okay, so now I've got don't ask again, deny, or allow. And now if I say allow, you can see it says thank you, permission granted. So what happened? It's gone into the if statement, checked if the permission was granted. It wasn't. So then it activated that pop-up. Just go back. It activated that pop-up there, which is this part there, and it asked the user to allow. When the user clicked on allow, it went into on permission result, checked for it, is the permission granted, and it says thank you, permission granted. So let's just check that one out again. I'm gonna just set it back there, get back to it, and you can see if I click on do something, it asks me. If I say allow, it goes to thank you, permission granted. Now if I click on it again, it will say permission granted, thank you. So you can see this is the else there at the top. So again, this one and that one should take the user to the feature. So if I click on do something, the permission has now been granted, and you can take the user to the feature. So that's the positive part of this. But if the user denies it, so I'm going to go back and switch this off again, get back to the app. So now the user clicks on the button. Again, it will ask him this. But now if the user clicks on the deny button, so there's two options there. Remember, this else if the permission is denied will be the deny button, whether this one is selected or not. So it goes into the if, and then this first if statement is checking if he only clicks on deny. So if I only click on deny and not select that one, you will see this is now my alert dialog that pops up at the screen. There's my title and my message, exactly the same. There's an OK button and a no thanks button, and we've got both of them there. So now if I click on OK, it will take me back to this part. So if I say OK, again that one will pop up. If I say deny, again the dialog, my own dialog, will pop up. And then if I say the negative button of no thanks, then it will say cannot use this feature unless you allow it. So if I click on do something again, because he didn't click on do not ask again, it will pop up this part again. So now the last part here is this last else there. If he clicks on do not ask again and then deny, then you can see it basically shows we will never show this to you again. And now even if I click on that button, it will come back to this part that says we will never show that to you again. So this will be the part where you deny the user to use that feature of your app because he will not allow it, even after reading what you have said about that permission and that it's actually very important to allow it. Right, so this is then using Android 6 permissions or permissions from Android 6 and up. You need to handle the dangerous permissions this way. So I hope you've learned a lot from this video on how to use your permissions. So please go and implement this also in your apps where you need to implement permissions.